I've been playing Total War for almost 2 decades now. Shogun 1 came out in June of 2000, and I've been in love with these games ever since. Certainly had its fair share of ups and downs, a couple disastrous launches, but overall it's a great franchise. Wouldn't be here if it wasn't. One thing it's never been great at, though, is the diplomatic side of gameplay. Is it surprising that a series that styles itself on unrestricted global combat might not put such a heavy emphasis on the forging of alliances, trade, or logical AI decision-making when it comes to interactions with the player? No, not really, but it's still been a source of disappointment for many of us over the years. The fact that diplomacy was often of little or no use whatsoever, that it was inconsequential, that it was impossible to know why a faction was behaving the way it was, why they had no desire to talk with you and iron out a deal, basically that the entire system could be a little bit obtuse, illogical, and had very little functionality in comparison to some other deeper strategy games on the market. Bare bones diplomacy, I guess you could say. Certainly true for the Warhammer series, but I guess you could make an argument that it's never really been where we'd like it to be for even the historical games. That even in Medieval 2 and the golden age of Total War, it wasn't a particularly fleshed out or engaging experience. Well, Creative Assembly have released 2 videos talking about all the diplomatic overhauls coming to Three Kingdoms. And now that we've seen, give or take 15 minutes from the campaign itself, I have a simple question to pose to you all. Do you think Three Kingdoms has a chance to revolutionize Total War diplomacy and how we interact with other factions on the strategic map? We're going to go through the cliff notes and some of the highlights now, but if you haven't seen the official videos yet, I definitely recommend you go watch them because there is a lot of information there and links will be in the description and the pinned comment below. And I'm going to be honest, I'm really impressed with what we've seen so far. I think there's a lot to be excited about here, and it looks like there's going to be a much more complex, much more nuanced, and much more fleshed out diplomatic system than we have ever had in the series before. I mean, it's always fair to jump into it with some healthy skepticism there and wonder, is it really going to work the same way it's being advertised when we actually get our hands on the game? But just the fact that CA are working so hard on it, they've acknowledged it needs improvement and are actively grinding to do so, bodes very well for the future of this game and maybe the future of the series in general. So what are some of the big changes that are coming with Three Kingdoms and diplomacy on that side of gameplay? The focus today was on military alliances and coalitions, which played a huge part in the collapse of the Han Dynasty and the warring states that scrambled for power in the vacuum that followed. Military alliances and coalitions are going to be 2 separate treaties, very different from what we've seen in earlier games. Simply put, a coalition is a non-binding military agreement to fight mutual enemies, where the player can enter talks independent of the group. It's a less tangible, more ephemeral type of treaty that's easy to enter into and improves your diplomatic standing with the other factions in the coalition over time. A military alliance, on the other hand, is a much more serious binding agreement, one in which all members vote on war declarations and other treaties and are obliged to aid in wars when their name is called. Instead of having a situation in where in previous games, you'd have to enter into like 5 or 6 separate alliances if you wanted to ally with 5 or 6 different factions, now a military alliance is treated as a collective whole where any who enter into it automatically become allied with the others in the group. And this is one of the coolest things for me about the direction Three Kingdoms is going right now, is that important Confucian principles of the time period like social harmony and the importance of the collective over the individual are actually being reflected in gameplay itself. It's a great way to immerse yourself in a time period when details like this are actually functional and playable, rather than just flavor text or eye candy. I think that's really cool. And what has me even more excited are the late game implications full-on military alliances could afford us as players. Apparently the AI aren't going to be shy about signing coalitions and becoming a part of these collective military alliances on their own accord. And as the campaign progresses, more and more of these regional power blocks are going to form and present a very serious threat to you in a late game scenario. And when the entire world is fractured and dealing with their own problems, the AI can be kinda easy to chunk down and defeat one by one as you hit that snowball stage in previous Total Wars. We've seen that a lot in games like Rome 2 and Attila and some of the earlier ones, and then it's just a matter of time until you win. Get a bit grindy, gets a bit monotonous when it's a foregone conclusion and you know, you're just kind of going through the motions, you know what's going to happen by the end of it. But now, if you run into this regional alliance, this powerhouse of 3 or 4 very mighty factions that are very built up, with 2 or 3 buddies at your own back, suddenly you've got a very exciting showdown with 10 plus stacks, all converging on the same borders between both of your empires. And to me, it sounds a lot more dynamic, a lot more interesting, and a lot more organic than, say, a bunch of chaos armies randomly appearing out of thin air right on your doorstep. That's not fun. You can game plan for it, but you know it's coming. It's cheesy. It doesn't really fit. It's not organic. When something like a regional power block forms and you've got to go on and take on this empire with your own buddies coming with you, that makes for a much more organic and a much more entertaining experience. Because it formed naturally. It's not a hard-coded screw you to the player to throw in some artificial challenge your way. Late game is straight up one of the biggest issues this franchise has had in the past. Balancing challenge and complexity while being logical and fair in terms of AI behavior, with an emphasis on fair, is a really tough juggling act, one I'm not sure CA have ever truly nailed. Realm Divide for Shogun 2 was challenging, and it was definitely exciting, but it was kind of illogical and made diplomacy 100% worthless. You could curate friendship with factions over 100 plus turns, have fantastic diplomatic standing with them, and yet 5 turns after Realm Divide and they'd still dow you alongside every other clan in Japan, and a couple turns later you just have like 15 stacks on your doorstep, and you're wondering, why did I ever even bother trading or allying with any of these factions in the first place if they're just going to declare war on me the second I declare myself Shogun? There's an element of logic there, but it's so silly that if you're going to bother literally spending like 30 years being friends with someone and then you just turn on you right away, it makes you wonder why you even went in there and went into diplomacy in the first place, because you can't engage in it. There's no point. It felt awful, is what I'm saying, and completely unfair. And Civil War in Rome 2 was janky for a long time. We know that very well. They've worked on it since then, but still has issues, and Chaos Invasion has its fair share of problems as well currently. So maybe, just maybe, alongside this new Emperor mechanic, where you break away from the coalition upon ascension to the throne, we will get the best of both worlds. A true late game challenge that still allows us to engage in diplomacy and keep on friendly terms with the factions we've worked so hard to establish relationships with throughout the course of the campaign. Don't want to throw all that work in the garbage can just because I am now the strongest faction on the map. Gonna be cautiously optimistic there, but no guarantees it will completely deliver. Hopefully it does. We're getting supply lines back, and these will factor pretty heavily into your alliances and military campaigns as well. So striking deep into hostile territory over rough terrain and long periods of time will wreck you and your army. So establishing base camps in friendly territory before beginning an invasion will be pretty damn important, just as it should be. And 2 old friends are also making their long-awaited returns: population and region trading. Population seems to be region-based now, not just on the town itself, and we've seen numbers from like 700,000 upwards to well over 1 million in some of the more populous areas, which should not be surprising. China had about 1/4 the entire world's population during the Han Dynasty. I think some 55 to 60 million people. And this population will play at least a limited role, allowing you to replenish casualties quicker and raise your peasantry income higher the more population you have. I imagine it'll be a little bit more complex than that, but we don't have the full details on that element of diplomacy quite yet. So for region trading, you'll only be able to trade regions adjacent to your territory. So you won't be getting terrifying border gore or those weird shenanigans that we saw in like Empire Total War or Medieval. I think Medieval had it as well, where the Spanish would like trade for a slice of the Mongolian steppes, or the Iroquois would get part of Great Britain as part of their trade agreements. There were some really weird things that we've seen in previous games, and you won't be able to do that here, so I like that change for sure, but they're bringing it back, and I don't think we've had that for a very, very long time. Region trading is a pretty cool mechanic. It usually doesn't make a big impact on my campaigns, but it is a nice way to get that border gore out of the way and kind of finish up a region that you've been wanting for a long time without straight up dowing everyone around you. And we've seen a lot more in-depth stuff too. Trading food in exchange for a grant of autonomy with a vassalized faction, the ability to call your own bannermen and direct all of your vassals at a single enemy warlord, annexation, loans over like a 10-turn period, and supporting independence for other factions. So there is a lot of cool stuff there, and even the quality of life stuff, like a make this work option that shows you exactly what you need to do in order for a deal to go through, is such a godsend for diplomacy. It adds a bunch of clarity and a bunch of transparency to a diplomacy system that was in dire need of that kind of content. Really good to see that kind of thing get made into the game. Overall, I think this gameplay has shown that CA is willing to push the boundaries and upgrade parts of the game that have been lagging behind for a while now, and I think that is really exciting. There's always a potential it's not going to work very well on launch day, and I would definitely recommend some skepticism here until we get our hands on it and play, but just the fact that these features are there in the first place means a huge step forward for the franchise. They are actively trying to make diplomacy better, and it feels like it's been forever since any real attempts have been made at actually improving it. So all of that is going to make me a very happy boy. I think the foundation has been laid here to possibly revolutionize historical Total War diplomacy forever. I wouldn't hold your breath on that front for the Warhammer series. There's going to be other things they want to focus on for sure, like avatars of bloodthirsty gods and fat boys riding woolly rhinos, but for historical Total Wars, it might just be that huge step we've been waiting for. And in more exciting news, it seems we've gotten the full list of major playable warlords now. A lot of them were pretty much guaranteed, and quite a few had already been announced, but Zhang Yan, leader of the Black Mountain Bandits, Gong Sun Zan, the White Horse General, and Kong Rong, the famed scholar, have all made it into starting factions, and alongside the Yellow Turban leaders, that means we're up to 14 playable warlords. That leaves Sun Jian as the only one starting south of the Yangtze River, leaving plenty of space for the Nanman tribes as potential DLC, and Korea is looking wide open as well. So it would not surprise me in the slightest if those two end up being the first two pieces of paid content after release. We'll be going over star positions and introducing some of those historical figures very soon, especially in the run-up to release, but for now, I want to know, what are you guys feeling about everything we've seen from the gameplay so far? Are you happy with the direction CA is taking with the game? What do you want to see that will sell you on the product? And what are your reservations as we approach March 7th and the rapidly approaching release of Three Kingdoms Total War? I'm getting more and more hyped as the months tick by, but ultimately, it's going to come down to the battles that will be what decides whether I keep coming back to the game or not. If the battles are good, if the sieges are good, I will be a very happy camper, and I want to know how the combat has improved since our last visit with the game, and where else the game has improved going forward. So, thank you all for watching. Let me know which warlord you'll be starting your campaigns with, who you're most excited to play as, now that you've seen all these starting playable factions, all the playable warlords, and I'll see you all in the next video. Any Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.